This is C.J. Chivers reporting for the New York Times. Russia's military invasion of Georgia continued on Monday with what appeared to be the opening of a second front out of Abkhazia, the other enclave. The fighting had started on Friday when Russia moved columns of armor and artillery and its infantry into South Ossetia, a smaller enclave in the mountains. Abkhaz enclave is much larger and mostly coastal. Everybody involved in this fight right now is trying to determine what Russia's intentions are. The initial hope, as it became clear that they were going to invade, was that they would stop with the annexation of the two ethnic enclaves, which have been disputed territory since the collapse of the Soviet Union. It appears that they have gone well past those enclaves. What is not clear is what their objectives are. Diplomats and analysts who are watching the fight say that they may be seeking to destroy the Georgian military forces, to disable them indefinitely and weaken the Georgian government. Georgia itself says that Russia's intentions are far broader and that they seek to overthrow the government of President Mikhail Saakashvili. This would be a clear demonstration of Russia's strength in the region and, in some ways, a retaliation for Mr. Saakashvili's policies, which have annoyed the Kremlin since he came to power in 2004. There is some fear as well that Russia may go beyond that, what one Georgian official told me would be the maximum solution, the occupation of the entire country of Georgia with its seaports and the oil pipeline. There have been signs as well coming from the Kremlin that they have some lesser included goals. One of the more curious announcements of Sunday was that the Kremlin was deploying criminal investigators to South Ossetia to begin the forensic collection of what it called evidence of war crimes. That would suggest that there may be an objective here of branding Mr. Saakashvili a war criminal for public relations purposes and perhaps even in the future seeking some sort of public procedure against him.
A lot of people are criticizing Putin's manipulation of these elections, criticizing his human rights record, but he seems rather popular. The idea that Putin will find a way to stay in power does not seem to be an unpopular notion in Russia.
This is a very disturbing problem for people, Democrats like myself. I'm a radical Democrat, militant Democrat, right? But I look at Putin, and all the polls show, and every Russian I've talked to, it tells us that Putin is adored in Russia. He is the new, this symbolic figure out of Russian history, the white czar, the good czar who comes out of nowhere to rescue dear Mother Russia in her moment of trouble and humiliation. He's done this. He's brought Russia back up on its feet. He's raised Russia's income thanks to high oil prices. He's restored national pride in Russia.
All the same language one could have used about Hitler in the early 1930s.
Yes, except that Putin does not seem to have any racist or even quest for international world power. He wants to restore the Soviet Union. I have no doubt about that, and he wants in a very muscular
By Soviet Union,
manner.
you mean recapture the countries that left the Soviet Union.
Yes, it's physical space without the communist system. He's a right-wing nationalist and wants nothing to do with the old communist way, but he wants to make Russia strong and really to make Russia the dominant world power. And why shouldn't it be? Because Russia has this immensity of natural resources and a very well-educated, intelligent population and very courageous people when they set their minds to it.
The U.S. corporately, if not at the political level, helped provide armaments for Germany in the 1930s, financing, was not that strong in terms of trying to isolate the rising Nazi regime. In today's parallel, to whatever extent that parallel holds, the U.S. set the plate for Putin. They set the plate for having such a strong nationalist leader. Is the West going to come to regret this?
I'm sure it will one day, but the problem is what we've done in the West, and the Bush administration in particular, has done acts like driving NATO right to Russia's borders. this incredibly stupid missile defense plan in Poland and the Czech Republic, and throwing America's weight around Iraq and in the Middle East, which are right next door to Russia. This has inflamed the most primitive, backwards, nationalist, xenophobic, anti-Western feelings in Russia, and that's what we're getting now. We've got Putin who's blasting the West for threatening Russia, and we've brought all the scary Russian extremists out of the woodwork.
The U.S. Bush administration seems to create their mirror reflection all over the world. Everywhere U.S. policy seems to go, they create, to say, their mirror opposite type, whether from in Iraq to Russia.
There's an old Taoist expression which is, you become what you hate. And in a way, I've often written that today's United States is mirror images the Soviet Union under Brezhnev. You have a leader who's completely out of touch with reality and slow-witted, surrounded by scheming imperialists who want to take over the world. And we're seeing the history is repeating itself, just in a different place.
What do you make of media coverage, Western, especially North American media coverage of Putin and Russia? I think generally he's seen very favorably here. There's the odd story about the killing of a journalist, but the human rights record is not front-page news here about Russia. What do you yourself assess media coverage, and why? Why do you think this is?
Well, first of all, everybody's ignored Chechnya. Russia has committed unspeakable crimes. Really, one could call it almost genocide in Chechnya, and it continues, squashed the life out of this tiny little 1 million people.
There's a lot of analysts say there was a kind of a deal after 9/11, that Russia would be full support of U.S. policy in first Afghanistan, then Iraq, and the U.S. would keep rather quiet about Chechnya.
Well, I believe that is the case, and that we in fact helped crush the Chechen independence movement by supplying the Russians with sophisticated electronic gear that allowed, for example, the assassination of the Chechen president Zhokhar Dudayev. It was done through the National Security Agency. We financed Yeltsin's war against the Chechens. It killed over 100,000 civilians. You know, we're still carrying on about 9/11. What about the 100,000 people killed in Chechnya? That's a great blot on America's honor, and we're culpable with Russia's crimes. So these are crimes, but they have been ignored. For the rest of it, the U.S. press has been pretty supportive of Putin.
Why?
Because he has not gone into direct conflict with U.S. policy yet, though he's certainly headed in that direction, and because they can't see any other alternative to Putin, and better the Putin that you know than some kind of disorganized Russia where all different factions are fighting for power.
Have we seen the beginning of a real split between Putin and Bush? It wasn't that long ago. President Bush looked into Putin's heart, and I can't remember, he saw a friend or saw a brother or someone he could do business with. Recently in Iran, Putin fired very powerful shots at Bush foreign policy, essentially calling it imperialist and aggressive, and warning the U.S. off of any aggressive action against Iran. The rhetoric from Putin against the Bush administration is very high. Is it a real split, or is this for domestic Russian consumption?
Oh, I think it's a real split. I think that as Russia feels its oats, its oil-fueled oats, and is stronger and stronger, it's reasserting its traditional foreign policy interests and spheres of influence. Very riled up about the Kosovo issue in the Balkans, this missile thing we just mentioned, and the Middle East. We're inflaming the Russians on really sore points for them. So you're going to see a greater distancing between the U.S. and Russia.
And as that distance widens, do we see a closing of distance between Russia and China? Is there cooperation now where they see each other as counterbalance to Russian American power and need to work together more?
There is and there isn't. They have been cooperating. Russia, for example, is China's largest foreign arms supplier of high-tech arms, and China needs Russia for that. And they are in agreement on opposing U.S. influence in Central Asia and the Middle East. But there's such a profound distrust between the Chinese and the Russians. They really detest each other. It's a racial, emotional, historical thing that where there should be much closer collaboration. There should be an entente there isn't. There's just a working relationship.
Are there any, what you could say, really democratic forces that are trying to emerge, and should the media here be covering that story?
There are democratic forces, but they probably represent no more than 8% of the intelligentsia in the big cities in Russia. There's always been, throughout Russian history, a very pro-Westernized minority, an elite that wants to do everything Western. Now, we just saw last week...
But pro-democratic doesn't necessarily mean pro-Western.
That's correct. But there are more enlightened political figures in Russia, but they have absolutely no popular support, and they're of no importance. In fact, we even, just last week, Putin said the remarkable thing, he was criticizing Peter the Great for opening up Russia too much to Western influence. You know, welcome back to the days of pan-Slavism. It's fascinating.